Welcome to Anime Audiobook. Naruto, Copy System. Chapter 31, Graduation Exam. Time flew by like a rushing river, and 4 years passed in the blink of an eye. Throughout those years, Shin diligently attended the Ninja Academy. As for graduating early, that had never crossed his mind. Now, it was finally time for him to graduate. Currently, the Academy's program was 5 years, a year shorter than it would be in the future. The graduation exam is coming up soon. Are you nervous, Shin? Nawaka sidled up to Shin, his voice laced with anxiety. Graduating required passing an exam, and the current exam was more challenging than the one in the future. First, you had to demonstrate proficiency in the Academy 3, the substitution jutsu, transformation jutsu, and clone jutsu. Then, you had to survive a spar against a chunin for 10 minutes. Only then could you graduate. Otherwise, you were held back. The Academy recognized that surviving 10 minutes against a chunin was a tall order for a student, so they allowed them to form teams. Teams could have up to 3 members. As long as one member survived the full 10 minutes, the entire team passed. That made it a bit easier. I'm not nervous, but you seem to be, Nawaka. Shin noticed Nawaka's trembling hands. Yeah, a little. It would be embarrassing to fail. How about we team up? Sorry, I've already teamed up with Kushina and Mikoto. You'll have to find someone else. Shin glanced at Kushina and Mikoto, then back at Nawaka. It was obvious who he'd rather be with. Fine. I knew it. I was going to carry you, but I guess you don't need my help. Nawaka sulked. Soon, Tanaka-sensei arrived and announced the start of the exam. The morning was dedicated to the jutsu proficiency test. This part was easy for everyone in the class. They were in the elite class, after all. Either clan members or exceptionally talented civilians. The Academy 3 posed no challenge to them. After the morning session, they didn't go home. They ate the lunch Mikoto had prepared in a quiet corner of the training ground. We're finally graduating. Does that mean we can go on missions now? Kushina asked excitedly. Mikoto was unusually quiet, her expression downcast. What's wrong, Mikoto? Are you worried about the exam? Shin asked. No, I'm confident I'll pass. But we'll be separated after graduation, won't we? Mikoto looked at Shin, her voice laced with sadness. Don't worry, Mikoto. Maybe we'll all be assigned to the same team. Kushina said, trying to sound cheerful. But even she was worried about being separated from Shin. If you don't like your assigned team, you can always request a transfer. Shin reassured them. There was no need to worry. They could always ask Tsunade for help. Mikoto and Kushina relaxed, relieved. In the afternoon, the second part of the graduation exam commenced. Even Hiruzen Sarutobi was present. He wouldn't normally pay attention to a graduation exam, but this wasn't an ordinary class. The students in this class were the future of Konoha. Even Hiruzen couldn't ignore them. And it wasn't just Hiruzen. Dans was also observing, looking for promising recruits for his root organization. After forming their teams, they were assigned their opponents. Shin's team was up against a chunin who looked about 16. Being a chunin at 16 had made him arrogant. He looked down on the academy students. As a chunin who had completed several missions, he saw these students as pampered flowers who had never experienced real combat. He didn't even bother hiding his disdain. You 3 brats should just surrender. Don't blame me if I'm rough. Kimura, their opponent, held his kunao, his eyes filled with contempt. We'll see how rough you can get. Kimura's arrogance annoyed Shin. He was just a lowly chunin, what was he so smug about you're asking for it? Kimura sensed Shin's disdain and felt a surge of anger. A mere academy student, looking down on him, a real shinobi, he was determined to make sure Shin didn't graduate. With that attitude, you'd think you were a cage. What's with the arrogance, newbie? Shin said calmly. He disliked this chunin from the start. Just a chunin, and he dared to look down on him. Did he think he was Madara Uchiha? Begin. No lethal force. The chunin examiner announced. He was there to assess their performance and ensure no one got killed. No need for you two to get involved. I'll take care of him, Shin said to Kushina and Mikoto. He walked towards Kimura, his steps measured and confident. Kimura glared at Shin, enraged by his casual attitude. I'll show you the difference between you and a real shinobi. He charged at Shin, his speed impressive. Well, impressive for a regular person. To Shin, he was moving in slow motion. Kimura lunged, thrusting his kunai towards Shin. He aimed for non-lethal areas. He wasn't going to kill him. He wouldn't kill, but he wouldn't hesitate to injure. Weakling. Shin casually deflected the kunai and punched Kimura in the gut. Kimura flew backward like a cannonball, crashing to the ground. He twitched a few times, then passed out. Examiner-san, I believe we passed. Shin looked at the examiner, who was staring at him with his jaw hanging open. Shin chuckled. He had shocked the examiner. He had revealed a bit of his strength, but he didn't care anymore. He wasn't the same weakling he used to be. Before, he had hidden his strength because he was weak. But now, he was strong enough to not have to hide. In 4 years, his taijutsu, ninjutsu, and kenjutsu had improved drastically. Most importantly, his 3 Tomo Sharingan had evolved into the Manjiki Sharingan. The Manjiki Sharingan, combined with his perfect sage body, meant he could use its powers without fear of blindness. What did he have to fear now? It was time to step into the spotlight. Chapter 32, A Surprise for You. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto left the exam area. Mikoto stared at Shin, her mouth slightly agape. Shin, how are you so strong? She was astonished. One punching a chunin, even most jonin couldn't do that. It's not that I'm strong, it's that he was weak. Shin didn't consider himself strong. Compared to powerhouses like Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, he was still a fledgling. Kushina, aren't you surprised? Did you know Shin was this strong? Mikoto looked at Kushina with envy. Living with Shin, she must have known all about his abilities. Of course I knew. And I'm stronger than that guy, let alone Shin. Kushina was indeed stronger than Kimura, the chunin they had faced. She might lack combat experience, but her raw power was undeniable. Kushina's strength was probably at elite chunin level. Considering her knowledge of ninjutsu and finjutsu, she might even be comparable to a Takubitsu Jainin. But her combat experience was lacking. Her actual fighting prowess was probably at the level of an elite chunin. Mikoto was also quite strong. She had awakened the Sharingan, and even though it was only at the 1 Tomo stage, it still gave her an edge against chunin. Even without Shin's help, she could probably hold her own against Kimura. She was talented. They returned to the classroom to await their team assignments. Soon, Minato, Akiko, and some Inyazuka returned. They had been a team. You're back already? Did you pass? Minato asked. Failing the graduation exam would be embarrassing. You defeated the chunin, right? Shin asked. They must have defeated the Chunin to be back so soon. Minato and Akiko were both strong, there was no way they would fail. Judging from his usual performance, Minato's strength was easily Chunin level. Akiko, chosen as a Jinchuriki candidate, had been trained by Mito and was probably just as strong as Minato. As for Tsum, she was from the Inyazuka clan and was also comparable to a Chunin. Even Minato alone could defeat a Chunin, let alone the three of them together. Yap! Minato was beaming. He was still young and inexperienced, so defeating a Chunin was a big deal to him. The future Minato, at his peak, wouldn't even blink at killing a Jonin. A while later, Noeki returned with the Hyuga brothers. They had also defeated their opponent. Shin, that Chunin was so weak. We crushed him. Yet, Chunin are pretty weak, Shin agreed. Shin, we're not officially Chunin yet. It's not good to say that, Hayashi said. I meant the average Chunin. Shin was referring to the average Chunin. There were exceptions, of course. The future protagonists, Naruto and Sasuke, and Might Guy's father, were all genin, but they were far from average. Soon, everyone in the class returned. As the elite class, they had all passed. If even the elite students couldn't pass, the regular classes would have no hope. Tanaka-sensei entered the classroom, carrying a box. You are all officially shinobi now. Here are your forehead protectors. Come and get them. The box contained their forehead protectors, a symbol of their graduation and their new status as shinobi. Also, team assignments will be announced tomorrow morning, so please come back then. Tanaka-sensei dismissed the class. Noeki invited his friends to celebrate, including Shin and the others. As dusk fell, Shin and Kushina said goodbye to Mikoto and headed back to the Senjua compound with Noeki. Hey, Noeki, where did you get the money? Shin asked. Noeki had treated them to dinner. Where did he get the money? Sis hasn't borrowed any money from me for the past few years. I've been saving up. And now that I'm a shinobi, I'll be making my own money. Shin shook his head. Did Noeki really think making money as a shinobi was easy? Small missions barely paid anything, and the high-paying ones were dangerous. Back at the compound, Shin stopped Noeki before he could go to his own residence. Noeki, you dream of becoming Hokage, right now that you're a shinobi, you'll be facing danger. Be careful. Noeki paused, then smiled. Don't worry, I'll be fine. You and Kushina should be the ones being careful. Noeki left. Shin and Kushina returned to Tsunade's courtyard. To their surprise, Tsunade was home. Surprised to see me? Tsunade asked, noticing their expressions. Yet, you said you'd be gone for a few days on a mission. What are you doing here? Shin's eyes swept over Tsunade's figure. Her most noticeable change in the past 4 years was... well, there. He couldn't fathom how she had gone from an airport to a mountain range. The mission was cancelled. Now hurry up and make me dinner. I'm starving. Humph, why should Shin cook for you? We already ate. You're on your own, Kushina stuck her tongue out at Tsunade. Shin, if you make me dinner, I'll give you a surprise tomorrow. Tsunade ignored Kushina and looked at Shin expectantly. A surprise? Shin looked at her thoughtfully. Hey, what's with that look? I hate that know-it-all expression. Fine, I'll make you dinner. I look forward to your surprise. Shin smiled and headed to the kitchen. Kushina and Tsunade glared at each other. Why don't you make your own dinner? Why bother? Shin, Kushina grumbled. Day, if I could cook, I wouldn't be starving. Tsunade rolled her eyes. Tsunade's cooking skills were... well, let's just say they were on par with Kushina's. Wait, you said you already ate? Tsunade suddenly remembered Kushina's earlier comment. Yeah, we had yakiniku. Noeka treated us. It was delicious, crispy, and juicy, Kushina said, deliberately trying to make Tsunade jealous. Tsunade gritted her teeth. That little rascal, treating everyone but his own sister. Of course, Noeka had no idea she was home. Chapter 33, Tsunade-sensei. It was 11 at night. Kushina tiptoed into Shin's room. Shin was still awake. Shin, I'm here to sleep with you. Kushina lunged towards him, but a hand shot out and grabbed her by the collar. Hey! Put me down, Tsunade! You meanie! Kushina shrieked, glaring at Tsunade. She hadn't expected Tsunade to be awake at this hour. Humph! I knew you'd sneak in here. Back to your own room, young lady. Tsunade dragged Kushina away, ignoring her protests. Kushina cast a pleading look at Shin, but he could only offer a helpless shrug. Tsunade, what's it to you if I sleep with Shin? Kushina demanded. You're both too old to be sharing a bed now. Tsunade ignored Kushina's further protests and tossed her back into her own room. Kushina pouted, defeated. The next morning, at breakfast, Kushina glared at Tsunade before dragging Shin off to school. Little brat, still glaring at me? Just you wait, Tsunade muttered under her breath. At the academy, Shin noticed that they were the last to arrive. Even Noeki, who was usually late, was already there. The students, all wearing their forehead protectors, were a mix of excitement and nervousness. After the team assignments, they would be real shinobi, ready to go on missions. Shin, who do you think your Janin-sensei will be? Noeki asked excitedly. My guess is your sister, Tsunade, Shin replied. Tsunade had promised him a surprise yesterday, and he suspected this was it. Really? Did she tell you? Did she say who my sensei would be? Noeki looked at Shin with anticipation. She didn't tell me. It's just a guess. Who do you want your sensei to be, Noeki? Shin shook his head. It wasn't confirmed, but he was pretty sure Tsunade would be their Janin-sensei. I want Orochimaru-sama. Noeki's eyes shone with admiration. He seemed genuinely eager to be on Orochimaru's team. Shin gave him a strange look. Orochimaru, what was so appealing about him? Then he remembered that Orochimaru did have a certain charisma. In the original story, many were devoted to him. I don't understand why you like that creepy guy. Shin shook his head. He didn't dislike Orochimaru, but he didn't particularly like him either. The current Orochimaru wasn't as sinister or twisted as he would become. Orochimaru-sama is a genius, one of the strongest in Konoha. He's way stronger than my sister. Noeki seemed to idolize Orochimaru. Don't let your sister hear you say that, or you'll be in trouble, Kushina warned. Settle down. Tanaka-sensei entered the classroom. Seeing the chaos, his face darkened. Noeki scurried back to his seat, and the others followed suit. Tanaka-sensei was still a formidable presence. The team assignments began. One by one, Janin entered the classroom, read out the names of their team members, and left. Team 3, Senju Noeki, Uzumaki Kai, Hyga Hisashi. Orochimaru entered, read the names, and left without a word. Noeki's face lit up. He couldn't believe he was actually on Orochimaru's team. He rushed out with Kai and Hisashi. Team 5, Namikaze Minato, Uzumaki Akiko, Inuyasukitsum. Follow me. Jiraiya entered and called out the names. Minato and his team left. The classroom was getting emptier. Uzumaki Shin, Uzumaki Kushina, Uchiha Mikoto, you three are Team 9. Come with me. When only a few students remained, Tsunade entered and called out their names. Shin smiled. He had guessed correctly. Tsunade was their Jainin sensei. They followed Tsunade to a training ground in Konoha. Shin, you don't seem surprised at all, Tsunade observed. I already guessed it was you. This must be the surprise you mentioned. Humph, you guessed it again. How annoying. Kushina scowled. She wasn't thrilled about having Tsunade as their sensei. She almost wanted to request a transfer. Mikoto, however, was delighted. Not because of Tsunade, but because she was on the same team as Shin and Kushina. Now, I'll assess your abilities. Don't hold back, Tsunade said. She wasn't going to give them another test, but gauging their strength was necessary. As their Jainin sensei, she needed to know their capabilities to assign them appropriate missions. Is this assessment really necessary? Shin asked. Of course. I can't assign you missions without knowing your strength. Unless you want to do D-rank missions, then we can skip this. There were 5 mission ranks in Konoha. D-rank missions were the lowest, simple tasks with no combat or risk, such as weeding, babysitting, and cleaning the streets. C-rank missions involved some risk of injury, but no combat against enemy shinobi. B-rank missions were dangerous, often involving combat and the risk of death. A-rank missions were even more dangerous, often involving Jainin or stronger opponents. Genin weren't allowed to participate in these. S-rank missions were the most dangerous, involving the safety of the village or even the nation. They were rare, but when they did occur, they were a big deal. S-rank missions required elite Jainin or even cage-level shinobi. They were the highest-paying missions, but also the most perilous. Fresh graduates usually started with D-rank missions. But it seemed Tsunade wasn't planning on giving them those. That was fine with Shin. He had no interest in those low-level missions. They wouldn't help him improve, and the pay was pathetic. Besides, he didn't need the money. Chapter 34, Shin's full power. Come on, attack me with all your might. If you impress me, I might even give you a reward. Tsunade tried to motivate them with the promise of a reward. You don't have to tell me twice. Kushina cracked her knuckles, eager to fight. If she could defeat Tsunade, she'd be ecstatic. Then let's begin. Tsunade didn't waste any time. She lunged at Kushina, her fist aimed at her head. Shin reacted instantly, pulling Kushina out of the way. He then grabbed Mikoto and leaped back, putting distance between them and Tsunade. Hey, Tsunade, you're an elite Jainin, attacking 3 genin fresh out of the academy and you're not even holding back. That's shameless. What did you say, brat? Tsunade glared at Shin. How dare he call her shameless? If they were ordinary genin, she might have been going a bit overboard, but Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto were far from ordinary. She didn't know the extent of Shin's strength, but she knew he was a genius among geniuses. When he was 5, she had estimated his strength to be at elite Chunin level. Now who knew? As for Kushina, as an Uzumaki, she couldn't be weak. An Uchiha Mikoto. While Tsunade didn't know her well, she was an Uchiha, she couldn't be weak either. Take this. This time, Tsunade targeted Shin. He had called her shameless, now he would pay. Fire style, fireball jutsu. Mikoto formed hand seals and unleashed a fireball at Tsunade. Tsunade was impressed. Not many genin fresh out of the academy could use jutsu, let alone with such proficiency. Uchiha Mikoto was definitely a genius. Despite Mikoto being an Uchiha, Tsunade held no prejudice against her. She had gotten to know Mikoto and liked her personality. Unlike most Uchiha, Mikoto was gentle and kind. That was why she had been allowed to join this class. Tsunade channeled chakra to her fist, and with a powerful burst of air pressure, extinguished the fireball. Shin, let's see how much you've improved. Tsunade lunged at Shin, her fist propelled by a gust of wind that forced Kushina and Mikoto to retreat. She's serious. Shin clenched his fist. He didn't dodge, meeting Tsunade's attack head-on. The ground beneath his feet cracked. Tsunade was thrown back several meters, her arm numb. But the numbness was nothing to her. She used the mystical palm jutsu, and the numbness vanished. "Brat, how are you so strong?" Tsunade asked, bewildered. She had used her monstrous strength, yet she was the one sent flying. "Simple. If you trained as hard as I do, you wouldn't be so weak," Shin said with a smirk. "Weak? You think you're stronger than me just because you landed a lucky punch? I wasn't even using my full strength." Tsunade was amused. "And you think I was?" Shin's eyes gleamed. He decided to fight Tsunade seriously. This was a good opportunity to test his strength. He wasn't afraid to reveal his power anymore. He might as well let Tsunade help him gauge his progress. "Tsunade, use your full strength, or I might just send you to the hospital." Shin's chakra flared, powerful enough to peel back the ground and shake the surrounding trees. Tsunade gulped. Was this kid a monster? How could he have so much chakra? She had thought her chakra reserves were impressive, but compared to Shin's, they were nothing. She felt like even a tailed beast's chakra might be comparable. She knew the Uzumaki clan had large chakra reserves, but this was ridiculous. Composing herself, Tsunade said, "Your chakra is impressive, Shin, but chakra alone doesn't determine strength. You had to be able to use it effectively." "You're right. But I'm strong in every aspect." As soon as he finished speaking, Shin vanished. A wave of intense danger washed over Tsunade, sending chills down her spine. It had been a long time since she had felt this threatened. But her reflexes were still sharp. She activated her monstrous strength and dodged. Just as she moved, Shin's axe kick landed where she had been standing. Missing his target, his foot slammed into the ground. Boom! A massive crater formed, the ground around Shin collapsing. Tsunade's jaw dropped. That kick was devastating. Even her strongest attack, the heavenly foot of pain, couldn't cause this much destruction. And his speed. She had barely dodged in time. If that had connected, she would have been done for. "Missed. Too bad," Shin said with a smile. "Brat, are you trying to kill me?" Tsunade grumbled. "If you couldn't dodge, I would have stopped at the last moment. I have control." "What if you couldn't stop in time?" Shin sighed. "Well, then there's nothing I can do. I'll visit your grave next year." Kushina, who had been stunned into silence, burst out laughing. Her laughter snapped Mikoto out of her daze. She stared at Shin in disbelief. That kick must have been A rank level. How could he be so strong? If they knew that wasn't even his full power, they might faint. Shin had only used 80% of his strength. He could have done even more damage. He had never neglected his taijutsu training. With shadow clones helping him train in ninjutsu and finjutsu, he had focused mostly on taijutsu and kenjutsu. And kenjutsu training also improved his taijutsu. With his perfect sage body, even without training, he would have been physically strong. But he had trained diligently. And he had also copied the physique of a taijutsu master. His physical strength couldn't be judged by his age. Not only could his chakra rival that of a tailed beast, but so could his strength. He wondered how he compared to the third Raikage in terms of physical prowess. Perhaps the current third Raikage was still stronger. After all, he was much older and had decades more experience. But in terms of potential, Shin was far superior. The third Raikage had already reached his peak, while Shin still had room to grow. Chapter 35, Learning the Strength of 100 Seal. Tsunade, are we going to continue our spar? Shin asked. Of course. You think I'm afraid of a little brat like you? Tsunade's chakra flared as she activated her strength of 100 seal. Her punches and kicks now carried monstrous power. Come on, show me what you've got. Tsunade was taking Shin seriously now. After his display of strength and speed, she couldn't underestimate him. She used the body flicker jutsu to close the distance, then aimed a punch at Shin's face. Trying to rearrange my face, are you? Shin blocked the punch and grabbed her wrist, flinging her away. Fire style, fireball jutsu. Shin unleashed a massive fireball, far more powerful than Mikato's. It was a C rank jutsu, but in his hands, it rivaled a B rank. He had Mikato to thank for this jutsu, she had taught it to him. That's incredible! Mikato gasped, her eyes wide. Shin's fireball jutsu was over 10 times stronger than hers. Tsunade, airborne, quickly formed hand seals and used the substitution jutsu, replacing herself with a log. But the danger wasn't over. Shin appeared behind her, a raised nan swirling in his hand. How is he so fast? Relying on her years of battle experience, Tsunade narrowly dodged the raised nan. If I had used the adamantine sealing chains, you'd be down for the count, Tsunade, Shin remarked. The chains would have restrained her, leaving her vulnerable to the raised nan. Tsunade had a weakness, her lack of long-range attacks. Relying solely on taijutsu put her at a disadvantage. Where did you learn that jutsu? It doesn't require any hand seals. Tsunade asked, referring to the raised nan. She understood the significance of a jutsu that could be activated instantly. I created it, Shin replied casually. Minato hadn't invented it yet, so Shin could claim credit. You're full of surprises. I thought you were a genius, but you're a monster. Is that a compliment or an insult? Tsunade Shin asked, rubbing his nose. Humph, let's continue. I won't be defeated by a brat like you. Hold on. Shin stopped her. He wasn't interested in fighting anymore. He had a good grasp of his strength now. Besides, fighting Tsunade with restrictions was boring. There's no point continuing. Let's call it a draw. Shin was being generous. If they continued, Tsunade would lose. You win, brat. I admit defeat. Tsunade glared at him. She knew she couldn't defeat him. It was embarrassing, but she wasn't afraid to admit it. How did you get so strong? Tsunade was an elite Jonin, bordering on Kage level. She might even reach that level soon. But she couldn't defeat a 10-year-old. No one would believe it. That's the difference between a genius and an uncommon person. Reality is cruel. Shin's smug grin annoyed Tsunade. Was she not a genius? She was indignant, but compared to Shin, she didn't seem that special. No, that wasn't right. She was a genius, it was just that Shin was a monster. By the way, Tsunade, you mentioned a reward. I think we earned it. Shin smiled. You did. Here's the strength of 100 seal. Since I'm your sensei now, I should teach you something. Tsunade handed them the scroll, surprising Shin. This was her signature technique. Besides medical ninjutsu, the strength of 100 seal was what she was known for. But don't teach it to anyone else, Tsunade said sternly. She was willing to teach them, but she didn't want it spreading. We're not idiots. We won't, Shin assured her. Thank you, Tsunade-sensei, Mikoto said gratefully. Look at Mikoto, so polite. She even called me sensei. Learn from her, you too. Tsunade glared at Shin and Kushina. Kushina glared right back, while Shin focused on the strength of 100 seal scroll. It involved precise chakra control, focusing chakra throughout the body, and releasing it in a burst of power, strong enough to shatter walls. Shin studied the scroll and realized it wasn't that difficult. It was simply a technique for unleashing explosive power with chakra. This is easy. Shin focused, controlling his chakra with ease. With his powerful mind and chakra control, this was child's play. He channeled chakra throughout his body, feeling it coat him like armor. So that was how Tsunade could withstand the recoil. The chakra acted as a buffer. This meant the strength of 100 seal wasn't just for offense, it could also be used defensively. Tsunade gaped at him. She had been annoyed when Shin called the technique easy, but now he was using it. He might not be displaying its power, but she could tell he had mastered it. But he was using it differently. She usually focused the chakra in one area, like her fist or leg. Shin, however, was channeling it throughout his body. Was this the privilege of having massive chakra reserves? You really are a monster, Tsunade said, shaking her head. It's not that difficult. Anyone with good chakra control can learn it. Shin was telling the truth. The strength of 100 seal was powerful and versatile, but it was easy to learn, no harder than a C-rank jutsu. Of course, that was assuming you had excellent chakra control. Kushina and Mikoto also started practicing. They couldn't master it instantly like Shin, but with his guidance, they learned it within half a day. Chapter 36, Shin's Abnormal Jutsu. You've all mastered tree climbing and water walking, no wonder you learned the strength of 100 seals so quickly. Tsunade was no longer surprised by their rapid progress. Well, I guess I have nothing left to teach you. Let's start taking missions tomorrow. She sounded a bit disappointed. Tsunade, want to learn a jutsu? Shin asked, a raised nan swirling to life in his hand. Tsunade had taught them her secret technique, he didn't mind returning the favor. You're going to teach me that no hand seals jutsu? Tsunade was surprised. Not many shinobi were willing to share their jutsu. Of course, you taught us your secret strength of 100 seal technique, it's only fair that I teach you something in return. Besides, don't you want to learn it? Well, since you're offering, I suppose I'll learn it, Tsunade said with a playful arrogance. Shin's lips twitched. He hadn't expected Tsunade to be so tsundere. He explained the raised nan training method to Tsunade and even provided personal guidance. But even so, it wasn't something that could be mastered quickly. It would take at least a few days. This raised nan is pretty good, but I don't see how it's useful for me, Tsunade said. No hand seals jutsu were powerful, but her fists were just as strong. Why bother with the raised nan when she could just punch her enemies? Don't underestimate the raised nan. It has a lot of potential. The basic raised nan is a non-elemental jutsu, but you can add chakra nature transformations to create even stronger jutsu. Shin explained. In the original story, Naruto had taken the raised nan to incredible heights. And the raised nan isn't limited to close-range combat. It can be used for long-range attacks as well. Shin held out his hand, chakra gathering and swirling into a raised nan. He increased the chakra output, the pale blue sphere deepening in color. Then he threw it. The raised nan struck a rock 30 meters away, exploding on impact, pulverizing the rock and creating a small crater. "You can throw the raised nan," Kushina gasped. "Yes, but you need to make it more condensed and stable." Naruto, in the original story, couldn't throw the raised nan, but Shin, after some research, had figured it out. The reason the raised nan couldn't be thrown was that its unstable rotation would cause it to dissipate once it left the user's control. By increasing its stability, it could be thrown. But this came with a drawback: increased chakra consumption. Making the raised nan more stable required more chakra. A thrown raised nan consumed 3 times the chakra of a regular raised nan. It was a trade-off, but Shin had chakra to spare. For him, the benefits outweighed the costs. Kushina and Tsunade's eyes lit up as Shin explained how to throw the raised nan. Mikoto, however, sighed. Shin had already taught her the raised nan, but she couldn't throw it. She didn't have enough chakra. The Uchiha clan had decent chakra reserves, but they couldn't compare to the Senju and Uzumaki. Mikoto could barely create 2 raised nan. It was an A-rank jutsu, after all. Even though it was less chakra-intensive than other A-rank jutsu, it still required a significant amount. "Let's head back further today. Meet me at this training ground tomorrow," Tsunade said. "You two go ahead. I'll train here for a bit." Tsunade nodded and left with Kushina and Mikoto. Kushina had wanted to stay, but Tsunade dragged her away. Once they were gone, Shin activated the mind's eye of Kagura, confirming that there was no one within several dozen kilometers. His eyes turned crimson, 3 black tomos swirling. The tomo spun faster and faster, merging into a 5-pointed shuriken shape. The Manjiki Sharingan. The Sharingan was a reflection of the heart. When it evolved from the 3 tomo stage to the Manjiki Sharingan, it awakened 3 new abilities. Besides the Susanoo, which was common to all Manjiki Sharingan, the other 2 abilities were unique to each user, born from their deepest desires. The Manjiki Sharingan could awaken incredibly powerful abilities, like Obito Uchiha's Kamui and Shisui Uchiha's Kota Amatsukami. And Shin's 2 abilities were perhaps even more broken. His left eye's ability was Yamatsu Hirasaka, the ultimate space-time ninjutsu. It allowed the user to travel between dimensions instantaneously, without the need for any markings or formulas. It was far superior to the Flying Thunder God Jutsu. It was a jutsu that could only be used by those who possessed all 3 jutsu, the Sharingan, Byakugan, and Rinnegan. In the original story, even including Boruto, only Kagaya Tsutsuki and Urashiki Tsutsuki could use this jutsu. But as Shin's Manjiki ability, he could use it even without the Byakugan and Rinnegan. His right eye's ability was even more broken. It was called Tenmame, and if Yamatsu Hirasaka controlled space, Tenmame controlled time. It allowed Shin to rewind his personal time by 3 minutes. 3 minutes might not seem like much, but in battle, it was a game changer. If he was injured, he could rewind time and undo the damage. Unless someone could kill him instantly, they wouldn't be able to harm him. He could be injured 1 second and perfectly fine the next. And combined with Yamatsu Hirasaka, his survivability was practically unmatched. "Am I really that afraid of death?" Shin chuckled to himself. He decided to test his new abilities. He took out a kunao and slashed his arm. His clothes tore, but his skin was unharmed. Shin blinked. Had his skin become so tough that even a kunao couldn't pierce it? "Looks like I'll have to use the big guns." He took out a scroll and unsealed a sword. He made a small cut on his arm, then activated Tenmame. The wound vanished instantly. His clothes, however, remained torn. It seemed Tenmame only affected his body. Clothes were external objects, the jutsu didn't apply to them. The chakra and jutsu strain, however, was significant. Using Tenmame didn't rewind the chakra and jutsu exhaustion he had experienced. Chapter 37, Accepting a Mission. Shin experimented with Yamatsu Hirasaka. This technique could be used offensively, to shorten the distance for long-range jutsu, or to disrupt and ambush opponents. It could also be used defensively, for evasion and escape. It was incredibly versatile. The chakra cost was manageable, but the strain on his eyes was significant. His Manjiki Sharingan had limited ocular power. If he didn't have the perfect sage body, using these abilities a few times would risk blindness. Blindness was caused by depleting ocular power. Once depleted, the Manjiki Sharingan's power couldn't be replenished. There were two ways to overcome this: evolve it into the eternal Manjiki Sharingan, or transplant Hashirama's cells and survive. With his perfect sage body, Shin didn't have to worry about permanent blindness. His ocular power would regenerate, but he was concerned about running out mid-battle. Regeneration took time. In a fight, he wouldn't have time to wait for his eyes to recover. If he evolved his Manjiki Sharingan into the eternal Manjiki Sharingan, he would have practically unlimited ocular power. The regeneration rate would match the consumption rate. He needed to find a way to evolve his Sharingan quickly. He wasn't worried, though. As long as he had time, he could evolve his Sharingan naturally. After awakening the Manjiki Sharingan, Shin had sensed a resonance between his eyes and his body. Influenced by his perfect sage body, his ocular power was slowly increasing. Once it reached a certain threshold, his Manjiki Sharingan would evolve into the eternal Manjiki Sharingan. The sage body and the Sharingan were indeed complementary, representing yin and yang, the perfect balance. Time to head back. Kushina will be looking for me. Shin headed towards the Senjua compound, his sword strapped to his back. This wasn't just any sword, it was the one he had taken from the Uzumaki clan shrine. After some research, he discovered it was one of the Kusanagi swords. There were 11 Kusanagi swords in the Naruto world. Itaki Uchiha's Totsuka blade was one of them. Shin's Kusanagi sword didn't have the lengthening ability of Orochimaru's Kusanagi sword or the sealing ability of Itachi's Totsuka blade, but it did have the chakra conducting ability of Sasuke's sword. Its greatest strengths were its durability and sharpness. It could cut through steel like butter. Shin didn't need any special abilities. He just needed a sword that could withstand his strength and swordsmanship. In his hands, it was the ultimate weapon. Back at the courtyard, he saw a feast laid out on the table. His face paled. Who made this? He looked at Tsunade and Kushina suspiciously. The food looked and smelled delicious, but to him, it was poison. I did, Mikoto said, emerging from the kitchen with a pot of miso soup. Oh, Mikoto. That's a relief. Shin sat down, ignoring Tsunade and Kushina's glares. Mikoto, you didn't go home. Why, Shin, don't you want me here? Mikoto's gentle gaze made Shin feel a strange sense of danger. Was it just his imagination? Mikoto was so sweet, how could she be dangerous? Of course I'm glad you're here, Mikoto. I was just curious. I asked her to stay, Tsunade said. Knowing Mikoto had no family, Tsunade had invited her to stay, hoping she would keep Kushina company and prevent her from sneaking into Shin's room at night. Shin and Kushina were too old to be sharing a bed. Tsunade didn't want to see that. The next morning, Tsunade took Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto to the Hokage's office to accept a mission. They didn't need to see the Hokage for ordinary missions, he'd be overwhelmed. But as new graduates, if they wanted to take on missions above D rank, they needed his approval. Sandame, I want to take on a higher level mission. Please sign this application. Tsunade placed the form in front of Hiruzen. A higher level mission. Hiruzen frowned, glancing at Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto. No, he said, shaking his head. They're new graduates. They should start with D-rank missions to gain experience. What kind of experience? How to be better farmers so they can become farmers or pig breeders if they fail as shinobi. Hiruzen's lips twitched. Tsunade had a point. D-rank missions were mostly useless and didn't provide any real training. But what if they're in danger? I'll take responsibility. Just sign the form. Tsunade slammed the form on his desk. Fine. Hiruzen sighed and signed the form. With Tsunade leading the team, he wasn't that worried. Tsunade took them to the mission assignment desk. What kind of mission do you want? She asked. Something with blood, Shin said after exchanging glances with Kushina and Mikoto. The type of mission didn't matter, as long as it helped Kushina and Mikoto grow. For a new genin, the best way to grow was to kill someone. If you didn't have the resolve to kill, you shouldn't be a shinobi. It wasn't a merciful profession, killing was part of the job. Tsunade nodded. Let's take this C-rank mission, bandit extermination. She handed the form to the mission desk clerk and accepted the mission. Bandit extermination was a common mission for genin teams. Being a bandit in the shinobi world was a tough job. New graduates, after completing a few D-rank missions, would move on to higher level missions. Facing enemy shinobi directly was out of the question. Sending new graduates against experienced shinobi was suicide. But they needed to experience real combat, to kill, to become true shinobi. Killing innocent people was unacceptable. Shinobi weren't executioners. So, bandits were the next best thing. They were a menace, and killing them was a public service. In the shinobi world, bandits were both hated and pitied. They were constantly being hunted, serving as stepping stones for new graduates. Alert, new mission available. View the system's voice echoed in Shin's mind. Shin opened the mission panel and saw the bandit extermination mission. Bandit extermination, eliminate the bandits near Nishimura. Reward, 1 common replication card failure, no penalty. Chapter 38, 38, Marry you if I can't find anyone else. A system mission. Shin was finally seeing another mission, the first one since arriving in Konoha 5 years ago. And a chance to get another replication card. Even a common card was valuable to him. Currently, he had 3 replication cards. The system gifted him 1 card annually. In the past 4 years, he had received 4 cards, 1 advanced and 3 common. He hadn't used the advanced cards yet. They were precious, capable of copying Kekkei Genkai. He had used the common cards to copy Sharingan prowess. That was how he had awakened the Mangeki Sharingan. By accumulating enough ocular power through repeated copying, he had forced his Sharingan to evolve. He had copied the Sharingan prowess of Uchiha Genin 7 times. Combined with his own training, that was enough to push his Sharingan to the next level. Shin immediately accepted the mission. He was going on this mission anyway, getting a replication card was a bonus. System, will you issue missions that match the missions I take on? Shin was excited by the possibility. If that were the case, he could become a mission master, grinding missions to farm system rewards. Do not get your hopes up, Master. There is no pattern to the system's mission assignments. The system's response dashed his hopes, leaving him disappointed. Shin, let's go. What are you daydreaming about? Kushina nudged him. Shin snapped back to reality and followed Kushina and Mikoto. They didn't know he had been communicating with the system. Tsunade-san. What a coincidence. We meet again. A ninja with light blue hair, a handsome face, and a Jainin vest greeted Tsunade. Tsunade frowned. Kato-dan, this is the 5th time this week. The first time was a coincidence. The second time, maybe. But the third, fourth, and fifth really. Her bluntness made Dan's smile falter. That's Kato-dan. Why is Tsunade so cold to him? Shin observed Dan. Dan looked at Shin and the others, seemingly trying to deflect the awkwardness. These must be your students. You're Uzumaki Shin, right? I'm Kato-dan. Nice to meet you. Dan smiled at Shin. But Shin sensed malice. He trusted his instincts. After awakening the mind's eye of Kagura, he had gained the ability to sense negative emotions directed at him. Dan might be smiling, but his malice was clear to Shin. Shin frowned. He had never interacted with Dan before. Why the hostility? Was it because of Tsunade? Was he jealous of Shin's closeness to Tsunade? But that didn't make sense. Who would be jealous of a 10-year-old? Whatever the reason, Dan clearly disliked him. Shin wasn't going to be polite. He glanced at Dan, then ignored him completely. Dan's smile became strained, his eyes flashed with anger, then he turned and left with his team. He was also a Jainin sensei, leading a team of genin who had graduated last year. You don't seem to like him very much. Tsunade looked at Shin with amusement. Are you jealous that he's talking to me? Do you have a crush on me, little Shin? Even though you're young, if you confess your feelings, I might be impressed by your courage and give you a chance. Shin's lips twitched. Tsunade, you're so self-centered. I was rude to him because he was giving me bad vibes. It has nothing to do with you. Yeah, Tsunade, you're so full of yourself. Shin likes me, don't you? Shin. Kushina suddenly clung to Shin's arm. Brat, I gave you a chance, and you didn't take it. Tsunade raised her fist playfully, aiming for Shin's head. He dodged easily. Tsunade, with that violent temper, you'll never get married, Shin teased. Tsunade scowled. If I can't find anyone else, I'll marry you. And if you refuse, I'll castrate you. Shin quickly backed away, feeling a chill in his nether regions. Kushina's expression changed. Shin didn't like violent girls. Should she try to be more gentle? She glanced at Mikoto, her eyes filled with suspicion. Mikoto was gentle. Would Shin like her? And from Kushina's observations, Mikoto seemed to like Shin. She was a rival. She had thought Tsunade, the cougar, was her biggest threat, but it seemed Mikoto was the one to watch out for. Mikoto was confused by Kushina's sudden hostility. She had no idea what was going on in Kushina's mind. Shin, you said Dan was giving you bad vibes. Tsunade looked at Shin. Yeah, don't you believe me? Tsunade shook her head. I believe you. And there's something else that's been bothering me. What is it? Shin asked curiously. Want to know? A mischievous smile spread across Tsunade's face. Shin had a bad feeling about this. If you want to know, come here and let me pinch your cheeks. On second thought, I don't need to know that badly. Shin rolled his eyes. Brat, don't try to weasel your way out of this. You promised to let me pinch your cheeks if I kept your strength a secret. What promise? Sorry, I have a bad memory. Kushina, did I promise Tsunade anything? Shin asked innocently. Nope, I don't remember anything, Kushina shook her head. She wasn't going to let Tsunade take advantage of Shin. Tsunade glared at them. These two brats. Fine, I'll tell you. Kato Dan asked me about you a while back. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time, Tsunade said, giving in. Shin frowned. Dan had asked about him, they had never even interacted. Why would he do that? Had he met Dan before? Shin thought it over, but he couldn't think of anything. He had been keeping a low profile in Konoha. He didn't know enough about Dan to understand his motives. Chapter 39, Bonus, Pitiful Bandits. Finally out of the village. Kushina skipped ahead, a cheerful grin on her face. She hadn't left Konoha since arriving. Mikoto also looked around curiously, taking in the sights. Hey, it's more dangerous outside the village. Don't let your guard down, Tsunade warned. Most shinobi died because of carelessness. It was important to be vigilant at all times. Okay. Kushina ran back to Shin, who seemed lost in thought. Shin, are you still thinking about that guy? She asked, nudging him. Yeah, it's hard not to. Shin nodded. He was contemplating how to eliminate Kato Dan. Since Dan harbored ill will towards him, he was an enemy. And the best way to deal with an enemy was to nip the threat in the bud. But there was no opportunity in Konoha. If he was discovered, his only option would be to defect. He was enjoying his life in Konoha, he didn't want to become a missing nin, constantly on the run. There's a shinobi approaching. Shin turned and looked back. Tsunade immediately followed his gaze. She didn't see anyone, but she trusted Shin's judgment. He had proven himself to be reliable. Shin's eyes widened as he saw the approaching shinobi. It was Kato Dan. Tsunade-san, finally caught up to you. Dan and his three-man team arrived, smiles plastered on their faces. What are you doing here, Dan-san? Tsunade asked coldly. Dan, unfazed by her hostility, replied smoothly, the Sandome Hokage sent me to assist you with your mission. Really? Tsunade eyed him skeptically. Did they really need assistance for a simple bandit extermination mission? We don't need your help. Go back. Tsunade waved them away dismissively. Dan feigned a troubled expression. I apologize, Tsunade-san, but these are the Hokage's orders. I can't disobey. Tsunade, since it's the Hokage's kind intention, let's accept their help. It'll make things easier for us, Shin said with a smile, as if welcoming him. Tsunade, Kushina, and Mikoto looked at Shin strangely. They didn't believe his act for a second. Dan's smile faltered. Shin's expression seemed familiar. It was the same fake smile he himself often wore. Fine, follow us. But don't get in our way, Tsunade said, glancing at Dan and his team. She didn't know what Shin was planning, but she decided to play along. Dan-san, we look forward to working with you, Shin said with a smile. Likewise, Dan replied, mirroring Shin's expression. Ugh, that's so fake, Kushina muttered, shivering. Tsunade and Mikoto shared her sentiment. With Dan and his team tagging along, the atmosphere became awkward. No one spoke. Shinobi traveled quickly. Within half a day, they reached their destination, Nishimura. Where are the bandits? Kushina asked, eager for action. Not far from here. See that mountain? According to the mission details, they're hiding there. 6 of them, all civilians. Only 6? Shin was surprised. He had expected a larger group, but he had overestimated the bandit population. Within Land of Fire, bandits were rare, constantly hunted by shinobi. After searching for half an hour, they finally found the bandits. Shin had expected some kind of hideout, but they were living in a cave. How pathetic! And the 6 bandits were all skinny and malnourished. Were they really bandits? They looked more like refugees. Are those really bandits? They look so pitiful, Kushina said. I guess so. That's what the intel said. Even Tsunade wasn't sure. If these were bandits, they were the most pathetic bandits she had ever seen. Boss, look! Women! One of the skinny bandits called out to their leader, a lanky man standing in the middle. No shit, I have eyes. Kill the men, keep the women. The leader drew a rusty sword and charged forward. Are you brain dead? Can't you see we're shinobi? Do you not see our forehead protectors? Shin was speechless. Fighting these guys was an insult to his skills. Mikoto, Kushina, I'll leave them to you. I believe in you, Shin said. This mission was mainly for Mikoto and Kushina's benefit. Shin had killed enemy ninja when he was 5. Kushina and Mikoto were nervous, despite the bandits' obvious lack of strength. Even Kushina, who had been eager for action, froze. Kushina, Mikoto, if you don't do something, this guy is going to kill me. Shin looked at the bandit leader, who was about to reach him, and sighed dramatically. Hey! Kushina and Mikoto snapped out of their daze. Seeing the bandit leader about to strike Shin, their eyes turned serious. They threw their kunai with deadly accuracy. Thud! Thud! The bandit leader's eyes widened as one kunai pierced his neck and the other his heart. Mikoto and Kushina ignored the dead bandit and rushed to Shin. Shin, are you okay? Why didn't you dodge? If I dodged, you two would have hesitated even longer, Shin said. But that was dangerous. What if you got hurt? Kushina glared at him. I didn't get hurt, did I? And do you really think he could hurt me? A malnourished civilian. If that guy could hurt him, he might as well commit suicide. You're not scared at all, are you? Shin asked with a smile. Kushina and Mikoto finally looked at the dead bandit. Kushina's expression was grim, while Mikoto's was pale. They had been too worried about Shin to pay attention to the bandit they had killed. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, the reality of what they had done was sinking in. Kushina had seen far worse during the destruction of Ozushiagakur, but taking a life, even a bandit's, still weighed heavily on her. Mikoto, who hadn't experienced such trauma, was shaken. Tsunade remained silent, letting them process their emotions. This was an important step for every shinobi. Chapter 40, Kato Dan, a root member. Kushina, Mikoto, they're getting away. Shin pointed at the remaining 5 bandits, who were fleeing in panic after their leader's death. Kushina reacted first. Without using any jutsu, she threw 2 shuriken, killing 2 bandits instantly. Mikoto, her initial shock subsiding, activated her Sharingan and unleashed a fireball jutsu, incinerating another bandit. She then threw a kunai, taking out the 4th. Mikoto might look gentle, but she was a fierce fighter when necessary. Shin finished off the last bandit with a kunai. Congratulations, Master! Mission complete. Reward, 1 common replication card. Looks like you've taken care of the bandits. Kato Dan arrived, having witnessed the last bandit's death. Tsunade frowned at him. I thought you were waiting at the bottom of the mountain. Why are you here? Dan hadn't followed them up the mountain. I was a bit worried, so I came to check. It seems the bandits have been dealt with. Your students are quite impressive, Tsunade-san. Dan said with a smile. Dan-san, where are the 3 genin you brought with you? Shin's sharp gaze made Dan feel exposed. They didn't come with me. I left them waiting at the bottom, Dan replied, his smile stiffening. Dan-san, are you familiar with the Uzumaki clan's secret technique, the mind's eye of Kagura? It can sense chakra within a radius of several dozen kilometers and pinpoint their location. Dan's smile faltered, then vanished completely. Everyone's chakra is unique. I memorized the chakra signatures of the 3 genin you brought with you. But I can't sense them. Care to explain, Dan-san? Tsunade's eyes narrowed. She knew about the mind's eye of Kagura. Her grandmother, Mito, had told her about it. It was a powerful sensory technique, comparable to the Byakugan. She believed Shin. If he couldn't sense those genin, there were only 2 possibilities: they had left, or they were dead. They couldn't have left, even she couldn't cover that much distance in such a short time. That left only one possibility: they were dead. Kato-dan, explain yourself. Tsunade was ready to apprehend him. Tsunade-san, you're not going to believe this brat, are you? Dan said, frowning. I believe Shin. He's more trustworthy than you. Tsunade channeled chakra to her fist, creating a gust of wind. Dan gulped, his heart pounding. He knew how strong Tsunade's punches were. She could kill him with a single blow. Also, I sensed 5 unfamiliar chakra signatures at the bottom of the mountain. Judging by their strength, they're at least Jainin level, maybe even elite. Shin stared at Dan. Those 5 shinobi were definitely connected to him. Looks like I've been found out. Dan dropped the act. There was no point pretending anymore. His previously gentle expression turned cold. He took out a signal flare and launched it into the air. Tsunade, don't attack yet, Shin stopped her. Hey, brat, what are you doing? This guy is clearly up to something. We need to apprehend him. Relax, I'm ready for whatever he throws at us. But first, I have some questions for him. Shin interrupted Tsunade, his eyes fixed on Dan. Dan-san, we have no quarrel. Why do you dislike me so much? This was what Shin wanted to know. He hadn't done anything to provoke Dan. I'll tell you now that I've been exposed. It's Lord Dan's order. He wants me to bring you back. Dan glared at Shin. Dan's, you're working for Dan's? Shin was surprised. That bastard Dan's. Tsunade clenched her fists in anger. Kushina and Mikoto didn't know who Dan's was, but they understood that Dan was the enemy. They prepared for battle. I can't believe it. But why would Dan's target me? Shin was baffled. He had been keeping a low profile. Why was Dan's interested in him? Was he simply too dazzling to ignore? Shin couldn't help but feel a bit narcissistic. I don't know Lord Dan's reasons. My mission is to bring you back and eliminate Tsunade. Dan looked at Tsunade. His mission was twofold: capture Shin and kill Tsunade. That bastard wants me dead. Tsunade was furious. She wanted to pulverize Dan and then tear Dan's apart. Just then, Dan's reinforcements arrived, 5 masked ninja, dressed similarly to Anbu. They were probably root members. Shin's eyes narrowed as he noticed the only red-haired ninja among them. Uzumaki Hikaru, is that you? Among the Uzumaki survivors who came to Konoha, besides Shin and Kushina, there were Akiko, Kai, and Hikaru, the only adult. Shin hadn't expected him to join Root and become Dan's lackey. He suddenly understood why Dan's had targeted him. Shin's lineage was a secret. He had both Uzumaki and Uchiha blood. Kushina didn't know the full details, and neither did Akiko or Kai. They were too young. But Hikaru knew. If he had told Dans, it would explain his interest in Shin. He probably wanted to capture Shin for research. After all, who knew what kind of power a combination of Uzumaki and Uchiha blood could produce? Dans would be intrigued. As for killing Tsunade, that was also understandable. It would weaken both the Senju clan and the Sandaime Hokage. Two birds with one stone. Shin, you said that's Uzumaki? Hikaru Kushina asked, moving closer to Shin. Shin nodded. His senses couldn't be wrong. He could sense the Uzumaki's sage body. The Uzumaki's chakra, due to their sage body, was different from others. A sensitive sensor could detect it. Shin, with his mind's eye of Kagura, was practically the best sensor there was. He hadn't been able to sense Hikaru from a distance, but now that they were close, there was no mistaking it. Betrayed by my own clan. How unpleasant! Shin's eyes glowed red, his three-tomo Sharingan fixated on Hikaru, killing intent radiating from him. Chapter 41, Killing Elite Jonin like chopping vegetables. Sharingan. Everyone was stunned, even Hikaru. It wasn't just that Shin had the Sharingan, it was that it was a three-tomo Sharingan. Shin, why do you have the Sharingan? Tsunade asked, shocked. Shin scratched his head. It's a long story. Let's deal with these guys first. Kushina, Mikoto, stay back, he said to the girls. The enemies were all Jonin level or higher, Kushina and Mikoto wouldn't be much help. Seeing his serious expression, they nodded and retreated. Uzumaki Hikaru, allow me to release you from this world of suffering. No need to thank me, we're practically family. Shin's three-tomo Sharingan spun rapidly as he focused on Hikaru. Don't look into his eyes. Beware of Sharingan Genjutsu. Dan shouted. But Shin didn't use Genjutsu. The three-tomo merged, and his Manjiki Sharingan activated. Yamatsu Hirasaka. A dark portal opened in front of Shin. He drew his Kusanagi sword and thrust it into the portal. Thud. Hikaru stared in disbelief as a sword pierced his heart from behind. The light faded from his eyes. Shin withdrew his sword. Hikaru collapsed, a dark portal appearing behind him. Yamatsu Hirasaka had opened a dimensional path from Shin to Hikaru's back. Shin's sword had passed through the portal, killing Hikaru instantly. Yamatsu Hirasaka wasn't just for defense and escape, it was even more effective for offense and surprise attacks. Hikaru's instant death shocked Dan. The other four root members looked at Shin warily. What was that jutsu? Dan had a bad feeling about this. They had only been concerned about Tsunade, but this kid was unexpectedly powerful. The Manjiki Sharingan. Tsunade was even more shocked than when she first learned Shin had the Sharingan. The Sharingan wasn't uncommon, the Uchiha clan was still around. But the Manjiki Sharingan was rare. As far as she knew, only Madara Uchiha possessed it. Seems effective enough. Shin flicked his sword, the blood splattering harmlessly on the ground. Fire style, Dragon Fire Jutsu. Wind style, Great Breakthrough. One of the root members unleashed a torrent of flames shaped like a dragon, while another used wind release to amplify its power. Tsunade's eyes widened. Even she would be in danger if hit by that. Most shinobi, except for taijutsu specialists, were physically frail. Tsunade was skilled in taijutsu, but that was due to her strength of 100 seal. Without it, her taijutsu was average at best. She was primarily a medical ninja. She had to dodge. As she retreated, she saw Shin standing still, seemingly frozen in fear. She panicked. "Shin, what are you doing? Dodge!" She tried to reach him, but it was too late. The fire dragon was upon him. "Nice teamwork. Now taste your own medicine." Shin used Yamatsu Hirasaka again, a portal opening in front of him. The fire dragon entered the portal and vanished. Then, another portal opened above Dan and his team. The fire dragon emerged, roaring towards them. They were too close, caught completely off guard. 2 died instantly, and 3 were severely injured. Dan survived, but he suffered extensive burns, his hair and face singed. That's some power. A B-rank jutsu, amplified by wind release, reaching A rank level. Shin observed the damage with a critical eye. Thwack! Tsunade smacked him on the head, glaring at him. "Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" She wanted to hit him again, but Shin dodged. "I'm fine, aren't I?" "Shin!" Kushina launched herself at Shin, tears in her eyes, and hugged him tightly. She had been terrified. "Shin, are you hurt?" Mikoto checked him for injuries. "I'm fine. Not a single hair out of place." "Tsunade, hurry up and attack. They're getting away." Shin pointed at Dan and the 2 surviving root members, who were trying to flee. The 2 who had died, including Hikaru, were Jonin. Dan and the other 2 were elite Jonin. Their experience had allowed them to survive the surprise attack. But they knew they were outmatched. They were retreating. Tsunade glared at them, her face contorted in anger. Trying to run not so fast. If it weren't for Shin's unexpected strength, they would be dead. She couldn't take on 3 elite Jonin alone. They could even kill her if they worked together. She wasn't at her peak yet. And if Dan's plan hadn't been exposed, he could have launched a surprise attack and killed her easily. Dan's had sent a strong team, a testament to how much he valued Tsunade's life. But he hadn't anticipated Shin's strength. He probably hadn't even considered Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto as threats. This time, he had miscalculated. 3 elite Jonin and 3 regular Jonin. Dan's had suffered a significant loss, especially with Kato Dan, who was likely a valuable asset. Tsunade charged forward, intercepting one of the fleeing elite Jonin. Dan and the other elite Jonin split up, escaping in different directions. Tsunade couldn't stop them both. 3 elite Jonin, running away like scared dogs. How pathetic! Shin watched them go. He had to act now, or they would escape. Yamatsu Hirasaka. He stepped through a portal, appearing behind one of the fleeing Jonin. His sword flashed, slicing the man in 2. "Ah!" Kushina screamed. It was a gruesome sight. She had followed Shin through the portal. Shin looked at the bisected corpse, blood pooling on the ground. It was indeed gory. He hadn't meant to be so brutal, but it was his first time killing with a sword. He hadn't controlled his strength properly. And the Kusanagi sword was incredibly sharp. But still, he had just killed an elite Jonin. It had been as easy as chopping vegetables. With space-time ninjutsu and his lightning-fast swordsmanship, killing was a simple matter, especially against weaker opponents. It was a massacre. Chapter 42, Killing Kato Dan. Return to the village. After killing the elite Jonin, Shin used Yamatsu Hirasaka to return to Mikoto and Kushina. Mikoto sighed in relief when she saw them. "Kushina, what's wrong?" She noticed Kushina's pale face and worried she might be injured. Kushina glared at Shin, then shook her head at Mikoto. "I'm fine. just a bit queasy after seeing that mess. Shin, Kato Dan got away, Mikoto reported. Shin looked in the direction Dan had fled. Despite his injuries, the elite Jainin was still fast. Let him run. Some people run in circles, Shin said cryptically. He then turned his attention to the elite Jainin fighting Tsunade. Tsunade had the upper hand, but the Jainin was holding his own with his superior experience. Too slow, Tsunade. Let me help. Flash slash. Without using Yamatsu Hirasaka, relying solely on his speed, Shin appeared next to the Jainin in a flash. His Kusanagi sword blurred, too fast for even Tsunade to see. When Shin sheathed his sword, the Jainin collapsed, 8 fatal wounds appearing on his body. Tsunade gasped. It had taken less than a second, and Shin had landed 8 blows in that time. You have to be decisive in battle. If you fought like that, I'd finish my dinner before you finished your opponent, Shin said, half teasing, half boasting. Tsunade was speechless. Was that really an elite Jainin? He had just killed. Elite Jainin were veterans, the strongest forces in each village. Killing one was no easy feat. But Shin had done it in under a second. And his speed. Even she couldn't have dodged that. Shin, are you a monster? How are you so strong? Tsunade asked, bewildered. Monster? What are you talking about? I'm a genius. A hard-working genius. Shin looked indignant. I have talent, I work 10 times harder than anyone else, and I have cheats. Why wouldn't I be strong? Tsunade stared at him, speechless. He had a point. But what did he mean by cheats? What about Kato Dan and the other elite Jainin? Tsunade decided to ignore the cheats comment for now. The other elite Jainin is dead. Dan is still running. He got away. Tsunade frowned. I said he's still running, not that he got away. Some people run in circles, remember? Shin activated Yamatsu Hirasaka, opening a portal in front of them. Kato Dan stumbled out of the portal. He stared at Shin and Tsunade, his burned face contorted in confusion. As he had been fleeing, a portal had suddenly appeared in front of him. He had been too close to stop and had run straight into it. Not so fast, Dan. Try running now. If you escape, I'll admit defeat. Shin smirked. With the mind's eye of Kagura and Yamatsu Hirasaka, there was no way Dan could escape. Dan was in a tough spot. He couldn't use his spirit transformation jutsu here. If he did, he'd be killed instantly. It was a technique meant for stealth and surprise attacks. Well, I'm done playing with you. Shin launched a raise Nan, piercing Dan's chest. Dan didn't even have time to react. This confirmed Shin's suspicions. He could take on cage-level opponents now and kill elite Jainin with ease. Even Cage couldn't kill elite Jainin so effortlessly. Shin could do it because of his speed. Speed was unmatched. Even a Cage, caught off guard, could be killed by Shin in an instant. Shin, why did you kill him? Tsunade looked at Dan's lifeless body. No point keeping him alive. Don't tell me you were hoping to use him as evidence against Dan's. That's pointless. Why? Tsunade had indeed been thinking that. She wanted Dan's to pay for this. Shin didn't know how to explain. Why? Because even with evidence, Hiruzen wouldn't punish Dan's. Besides, Dan was a root member. Knowing Dan's, he would have implanted some kind of safeguard in Dan. He wouldn't be able to reveal anything. You think you can take down the Hokage's advisor with just Kato Dan, and do you really think he'd be able to say anything even if everything went perfectly? Would the Sandame actually punish Dan's? Shin's question stumped Tsunade. Even with evidence, knowing her teacher, he wouldn't do anything to dance. "Let's dispose of the bodies and pretend this never happened," Shin said. But the Sandame approved their involvement. "Won't he ask about them?" Mikoto asked. "Mikoto, you really believed Dan's lies? I guarantee you, the Sandame never sent him to help us," Shin said with a smile. "The Sandame wouldn't send reinforcements for a C-rank mission. Dan had been lying." "Tsunade, you realized that too, right?" Shin looked at her. "Ahem, yes, of course." Tsunade blushed slightly. Whether she had actually realized it or not was another matter. Shin used the fireball jutsu to incinerate the bodies, leaving no trace. Then they returned to Konoha. Shin opened a Yamatsu Hirasaka portal, and they appeared near the village. "That space-time ninjutsu can cover such a distance that's convenient," Tsunade remarked. "By the way, where did you learn that jutsu?" "It's my Manjiki Sharingan ability," Shin pointed at his eyes. Tsunade opened her mouth, wanting to ask about his Sharingan, but hesitated. It was probably a sensitive topic. Shin noticed her hesitation. "Want to know about my Sharingan?" "Yes, but if you don't want to talk about it, I won't pry. I'll tell you everything when we get back." Shin wasn't planning on hiding it. If he were, he wouldn't have used his Manjiki Sharingan in the first place. Chapter 43, Helping Mikoto awaken her Tsutomu Sharingan. Back in the village, they went to the mission assignment desk and completed their mission, receiving their reward. The reward for a C-rank mission was 10,000 ryo. It wasn't much, especially since it had to be split 4 ways. 2,500 ryo each. Enough for a month's worth of living expenses, but for a shinobi, that barely covered the cost of replenishing their ninja tools. After completing the mission, they returned to Tsunade's house, Mikoto tagging along. Seeing Tsunade and Kushina staring at him expectantly, Shin cleared his throat. "I know you're curious about my Sharingan. There's no need to hide it anymore. I have Uchiha blood." Shin explained his lineage, revealing that his mother was an Uzumaki, but his father was an Uchiha. "So your father was an Uchiha? Do you know his name?" Tsunade asked curiously. Shin glared at her. "Don't be so nosy. I don't know who he is, and I don't care. Besides, he's dead. He might have feelings for his mother in this life, but he felt nothing for his father. He had never even met the man." "Mikoto, you can stay here for now," Tsunade said. Seeing Mikoto's confusion, she explained, "It'll be easier for me to train you here. And it's also to protect you from Dance." Tsunade knew Dance was ruthless. After suffering such a loss, who knew what he might do? Tsunade's right, Mikoto. "Stay here for now," Shin agreed. He had been about to suggest the same thing. He knew Dance even better than Tsunade. If Mikoto wasn't under their protection, she might be in danger. Even within Konoha, Dance wouldn't hesitate to act. He knew that even if Hiruzen found out, the punishment would be a slap on the wrist. "Tsunade, you should be careful too," Shin warned. Tsunade was strong, but she wasn't cage level yet. If Dance wanted to eliminate her, he could easily send a few elite Jainin. If it weren't for Shin, Tsunade would have been killed. "Dance wouldn't dare attack me within Konoha," Tsunade said confidently. She was right. Dance might try something outside the village, but within Konoha, he wouldn't risk it. Killing an elite Jainin quickly was difficult. Not everyone was Shin. Even Dance himself couldn't take down Tsunade quickly. And if he couldn't finish her off quickly, other Konoha shinobi would intervene. Even Hiruzen wouldn't be able to protect Dance then. Attacking the Senjua clan princess. What was he thinking? The Senjua clan might have declined, but they weren't extinct. They still held influence in Konoha. Shin, how did you awaken the Mangeki Sharingan? I thought only Madara Uchiha had it. Tsunade was curious. Madara's isn't a normal Mangeki Sharingan. It's the eternal Mangeki Sharingan. And awakening the Mangeki Sharingan is simple. Tsunade's lips twitched. Simple? Then why couldn't so many Uchiha awaken it? Mikoto looked at Shin with curiosity. As an Uchiha, she had heard of the Mangeki Sharingan, but no one knew how to awaken it. Emotional turmoil. If your emotions are intense enough, your Sharingan will evolve. Emotional turmoil was the key to awakening the Mangeki Sharingan. In the original story, everyone who awakened it had experienced intense emotional trauma. Itaki Uchiha witnessed Shisui Uchiha's suicide, which triggered his Mangeki Sharingan. Obito Uchiha saw his beloved Rin no Hara die, and his Sharingan jumped from 2 Tomo to Mangeki. Shin's Mangeki Sharingan awakening, while not triggered by trauma, was still related to his mental state. If you see your loved one die in front of you, awakening the Mangeki Sharingan is almost guaranteed. That's brutal, Tsunade frowned. How did you awaken yours then? Ahem, I have my methods. Not something people can replicate. The system had played a significant role in his Mangeki Sharingan awakening. Without it, he would have awakened it 2 years later. Fine, keep your secrets. Can you help Mikoto evolve her Sharingan? Tsunade asked. Mikoto looked at Shin hopefully. The Sharingan was a powerful asset for an Uchiha. Evolving the Sharingan also increased chakra and overall strength. I can, but it's a bit unpleasant. Shin looked at Mikoto, considering his options. Mikoto had a bad feeling about this, but she was determined to become stronger. She gritted her teeth. Shin, please. Mikoto, are you sure? Don't blame me later, Shin warned. Mikoto nodded resolutely. Let's go outside then. Tsunade and Kushina followed, curious. Yamatsu Hirasaka. Shin activated his Mangeki Sharingan and opened a portal. Go on, Mikoto. Mikoto, trusting Shin completely, stepped through the portal. She vanished. Seeing Tsunade and Kushina's confused expressions, Shin pointed upwards. They looked up and saw Mikoto falling from the sky. The portal had deposited her hundreds of meters in the air. Mikoto was terrified. Even a cage would be scared falling from that height, let alone a new genin. Her Sharingan activated instinctively. As the ground rushed towards her, her fear peaked. The single Tomo in her eyes spun rapidly, then another Tomo appeared. She had awakened the 2 Tomo Sharingan. But she didn't have time to celebrate. She was about to die. Just before she hit the ground, another portal appeared, and she fell through. The portal reappeared in front of Shin. Mikoto stumbled out, almost falling, but Shin caught her. Mikoto, are you all right? Mikoto was still in shock, her mind reeling from the near-death experience. Chapter 44, Mikoto's Gratitude. Mikoto, your Sharingan has evolved to 2 Tomo. Kushina exclaimed. Even Tsunade was surprised. Shin had actually done it. Mikoto, who had been in a daze, finally snapped back to reality, her face pale. Mikoto, are you all right? Shin asked cautiously. He knew she wasn't in any real danger, but his method wasn't exactly pleasant. But there was no easy way to force the Sharingan to evolve. Gain came with pain. I'm fine, Mikoto said through gritted teeth, glaring at Shin. Ahaha, that's good. Shin chuckled nervously. Mikoto looked like she wanted to eat him alive. Was it just his imagination? Mikoto tried to calm her racing heart. She was still shaken. Mikoto, I could probably help you awaken the 3 Tomo Sharingan too. Maybe 2 more falls, and you'll have it. Want to try? Mikoto took a step back. No way. She couldn't handle that again. She'd rather stick with the 2 Tomo Sharingan. No, thank you. I'll awaken it on my own, she said quickly. Is it really that scary? Kushina asked. Mikoto looked at her. You should try it, Kushina. Then you'll know. No, thank you. Kushina had watched Mikoto fall from the sky, just thinking about experiencing it herself made her shudder. Mikoto might have been terrified, but the results were worth it. Her chakra had doubled, and with her 2 Tomo Sharingan, she was now comparable to an elite Chunin. Shin was a bit disappointed that Mikoto refused, but he quickly moved on. He was about to go train when Tsunade stopped him. Tsunade, what is it? Shin asked. You said Madara Uchiha doesn't have the Mangeki Sharingan, but the eternal Mangeki Sharingan. What's that? An evolved form of the Mangeki Sharingan? She had forgotten about this earlier, but now she remembered. Yes, the eternal Mangeki Sharingan is an evolved form of the Mangeki Sharingan. You didn't know that? Shin was surprised. The Senju and Uchiha were mortal enemies. How could she not know about Madara's eternal Mangeki Sharingan? Is it that strange that I don't know? Tsunade glared at him. How do you know about it? I just do. Shin didn't know how to answer. Tsunade gave him a knowing look. She had known from the beginning that he had many secrets. But she wouldn't pry. If he didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't ask. Changing the subject, she asked, what's the difference between the Mangeki Sharingan and the eternal Mangeki Sharingan? The difference is huge. First, the ocular power. If the Mangeki Sharingan's ocular power is a river, the eternal Mangeki Sharingan's is an ocean. The eternal Mangeki Sharingan can use the perfect Susanoo, while the Mangeki Sharingan can't due to insufficient ocular power. Also, the eternal Mangeki Sharingan can be used without limitations, while the Mangeki Sharingan can't. The ocular power it consumes doesn't regenerate. Overuse leads to vision loss and eventually blindness. What you're saying, the Mangeki Sharingan can cause blindness? Tsunade, Kushina, and Mikoto exclaimed in unison. Don't worry, I'm special. I won't go blind, Shin reassured them, seeing the concern in their eyes. Really? Kushina looked at him skeptically. Don't lie to us. I swear, if I'm lying, I'm a puppy. Kushina finally believed him. Don't worry, I have a way to evolve my Sharingan. I'm going to train now. Shin left to train. Mikoto checked the time and went to the kitchen to cook. Kushina and Tsunade were left staring at each other. Soon, Mikoto finished cooking and went to call Shin for dinner. Smells delicious, Shin said as he entered, inhaling the aroma. Mikoto might be young, but she was a great cook. Shin, I made this chicken soup for you. It's to thank you for helping me awaken my 2 Tomo Sharingan. No need for thanks, Mikoto. We're friends, we don't need such formalities, Shin said with a smile. Friends? What kind of friends? Kushina interjected, glaring at Shin. Teammates, of course. What else would we be? Shin said innocently. That soup smells amazing. Kushina reached for a bowl, but Mikoto swatted her hand away. Kushina, this is for Shin. Only he can have it. It's my way of thanking him. You have to finish it all, Shin, Mikoto said seriously. Humph, who cares, I don't even want any, Kushina pouted. Since it's Mikoto's kind gesture, I'll finish it all, Shin said, taking the bowl from Mikoto. The aroma was enticing, it must be delicious. He blew on the soup to cool it down and took a sip. His face contorted. It was incredibly salty. What's wrong, don't you like it? Mikoto asked with a smile. Shin looked at her. Was it just his imagination, or was her smile a bit creepy? Tsunade, eating quietly, glanced at Shin's face and immediately knew something was wrong with the soup. No wonder Mikoto wouldn't let them have any. Mikoto, it's a bit salty, Shin said with a wry smile. He understood now. This wasn't gratitude, it was revenge. Mikoto was still holding a grudge for the way he had helped her awaken her Sharingan. Salty, just drink more water then, Mikoto said cheerfully. Shin stared at her. Was she a demon? This wasn't the sweet Mikoto he knew. Mikoto, I helped you awaken your Sharingan, and this is how you repay me, Shin sighed dramatically. You almost scared me to death. Mikoto glared at him. She still had nightmares about that experience. Ahem, it was all part of the process. And look, you have your two-tomo Sharingan now. Shin coughed awkwardly. He had been a bit harsh. Fine, I'll finish the soup. He looked at Mikoto's vengeful expression and sighed. Don't. I might have gone a bit overboard with the salt, Mikoto admitted, taking the soup away. You're too kind, Mikoto, Shin said with a grin. Mikoto blushed and glared at him playfully. Kushina watched their exchange, a pang of jealousy in her heart. Chapter 45, Dan's Fury. Kushina, where are you going? Mikoto asked as Kushina headed out the door. Mikoto, I have something to discuss with Shin. You can go to bed, Kushina said, a slight tremor in her voice. Nope. Mikoto blocked her path, shaking her head. Tsunade-sensei told me to keep an eye on you and make sure you don't sneak out at night, especially to Shin's room. Kushina gritted her teeth. Tsunade was so mean. And Mikoto too. In the end, Kushina couldn't escape Mikoto's watchful eye and had to return to her room, fuming. The next morning, Shin woke up early, but someone was already up before him. Morning, Mikoto. Shin, you're awake. I'll go make breakfast. No, wait until Tsunade and Kushina wake up. Who knows when they'll grace us with their presence, they're both lazy. It's not wise to gossip about people behind their backs, especially when they're within earshot. Tsunade's voice was cold. Shin, did I just hear you call me lazy? Kushina glared at him. Shin was speechless. Had the sun risen in the west today? Why were they up so early? Ahem, I'm going to practice Kenjutsu. Can't let my skills get rusty. See you later. Shin made a quick escape, using Yamatsu Hirasaka to teleport away before Tsunade could catch him. He returned half an hour later for breakfast. Seeing Tsunade and Kushina's icy expressions, he decided to change the subject. Tsunade, should we go on a mission today? It's up to you. If you want to go, we can. If not, I wouldn't mind taking a break. Shin, Kushina, and Mikoto exchanged glances. Kushina and Mikoto looked at Shin expectantly. It was his decision. If he wanted to go on a mission, they would. Shin thought it over. Can we take a B-rank mission? He asked Tsunade. C-rank missions rarely involved combat against ninja. Kushina and Mikoto needed to fight real shinobi to gain experience. He also needed to face stronger opponents to improve. But finding opponents who could challenge him was difficult. He could kill elite Jainin like they were nothing. Even a quasi cage would be a walk in the park. He needed cage-level opponents. A 10-year-old cage that would be a record. Shin didn't believe anyone his age was as strong as him. After all, he had cheats. Even the Sage of Six Paths Sons wouldn't be his match at this age. A B-rank mission impossible. The Sandame won't allow it. The C-rank mission was already an exception. Tsunade shook her head. They were genin fresh out of the academy. The C-rank mission was only approved because of her. If that's the case, we might as well stay in Konoha and train. Shin decided to skip the missions. They didn't need the money, there was no point doing those pointless missions. In the root base, Dan's face was dark with fury. You're saying Tsunade and those brats returned? Yes, Dan-sama. They completed their mission. What about Kato Dan? Any news? Dan's was livid. He had sent such a strong force, yet Tsunade had returned, and they hadn't captured that Uzumaki Shin brat. No news. They haven't returned. Dan's anger subsided, replaced by a frown. He had sent them to kill Tsunade. She was back, but they weren't. And there was no news. Something must have happened. Investigate. And don't let Sarutobi find out, Dan's ordered the root member. After the member left, Dan slammed his fist on the table, his anger boiling over. 3 elite Jainin and 3 regular Jainin, gone without a trace. How could he not be furious? Sarutobi Hiruzen, I hope you're not involved in this. Dan's eyes narrowed. He suspected Hiruzen had something to do with this. If it were just Tsunade, he was confident she would be dead. That was why he suspected Hiruzen's involvement. Perhaps his actions had been discovered. He didn't suspect Shin. After all, Shin was only 10. Who would think a child could be that strong? So, he blamed Hiruzen for interfering with his plans. Shin, of course, had no idea about Dan's suspicions. If he knew, he would have laughed. Let Dan's and Hiruzen fight amongst themselves. Neither of them were good people. Shin and his team were training, with Tsunade overseeing them. Well, she was overseeing Kushina and Mikoto. She couldn't train Shin, he was stronger than her. Wind style, Rasen Shuriken. Shin threw the Rasen Shuriken. It struck the wooden target and exploded, obliterating the target and leaving a massive crater in the ground. The chakra storm raged for a while. Finally perfected it. Shin was satisfied. He had created thousands of shadow clones to research and refine the Rasen Shuriken, and now it was complete. The Rasen Shuriken was a jutsu Naruto had developed from the Raise Nan. It was powerful, but it had drawbacks. It was unstable, required close-range combat, and had the side effect of damaging the user's arm. It was classified as an S-rank forbidden jutsu. But those were the drawbacks of the incomplete version. In the original story, Naruto had overcome those weaknesses after mastering Sage Mode. Shin didn't have Sage Mode, but that didn't stop him from perfecting the Rasen Shuriken. The key to the Rasen Shuriken was stability. With enough control, the jutsu wouldn't harm the user. Shin's Rasen Shuriken caught Tsunade's attention. What was that jutsu? She asked, stunned. I developed it. It's a combination of the Raise Nan and Wind Release. Not bad, Shin grinned. Tsunade was speechless. This jutsu was S-rank level, and Shin had developed it. She felt a pang of jealousy. This kid was a monster. How could common shinobi like her compete? Chapter 46, 46, Making Tsunade Call Me Teacher. Shin, that jutsu is incredible. I want to learn it. Kushina's eyes sparkled as she witnessed the destructive power of wind style, Rasen Shuriken. Shin shook his head. Kushina, it's not that I don't want to teach you, but you're not ready for this jutsu yet. Kushina, S-rank jutsu are beyond your reach for now. They're not easy to learn, Tsunade added. S-rank jutsu were powerful, but also difficult to master. The Rasen Shuriken was no exception, it was an S-rank forbidden jutsu. Training in the Rasen Shuriken was risky, you could easily injure yourself. The Rasen Shuriken transforms wind-release chakra into microscopic needles that attack the opponent's cells directly. Even if it doesn't kill them, it can cause paralysis. But it has drawbacks. If you lose control during training, you can injure yourself. And the incomplete Rasen Shuriken can't be thrown, so you risk getting caught in the blast. It's best to use shadow clones to train in this jutsu. Shin explained the intricacies of the Rasen Shuriken. He had used shadow clones to develop and refine the jutsu before attempting to use it himself. But if Kushina used shadow clones to train, she would run out of chakra quickly. She wasn't ready for this jutsu yet. The chakra consumption is immense. Even with your large reserves, Kushina, you can't handle it. Let's wait until you're older. Fine. Kushina wasn't too disappointed. But Tsunade can learn it. Shin looked at Tsunade. Tsunade had enough chakra. As a senju, she also possessed the sage body. While it wasn't as potent as Shin's, her chakra reserves were still massive. Despite being an elite Jainin, her chakra volume was several times greater than Hiruzen's. A shinobi with the sage body rarely had chakra issues. And those with the perfect sage body had chakra overflowing. You're going to teach me this jutsu? Tsunade looked at Shin, surprised. This wasn't some common jutsu, it was an S rank. Was this kid really interested in her? If you don't want to learn it, that's fine. It's just an S rank jutsu. Nothing special to me. Shin shrugged nonchalantly. He wasn't boasting. The Rasen Shuriken was powerful, but there were stronger jutsu out there. Of course I want to learn it. It's an S-rank jutsu. Even Tsunade couldn't resist the allure of an S-rank jutsu. In that case, call me Shin-sensei. Shin grinned. You're looking for a beating. Tsunade raised her fist playfully. Shin dodged easily. Tsunade's punches were slow to him. Damn it! Tsunade was annoyed that she couldn't land a hit on him. Come on, Tsunade. This is a great opportunity. One sensei for an S-rank jutsu. Kushina egged her on. Mikoto, don't you think so too? Kushina nudged Mikoto. Yes, I think Tsunade-sensei is getting a great deal, Mikoto agreed with a smile. She and Kushina were enjoying this. Tsunade snorted. An S-rank jutsu for calling this brat sensei? No way. Shin-sensei, well, it seemed no one was immune to the allure of a good deal, not even Tsunade. Shin was surprised. He had been joking. He hadn't expected her to actually call him sensei. Knowing Tsunade's personality, this was hard to believe. What do you want to get punched? Tsunade blushed under their gazes. Calling Shin-sensei felt like a loss of dignity. Since you've made such a sacrifice, Tsunade, I'll teach you the Rasen Shuriken, Shin said with a grin. Tsunade gritted her teeth. She felt like kicking herself. Why had she called him sensei? If she could turn back time, she would take it back and punch Shin instead. Seeing her anger, Shin coughed and started explaining the key points of the Rasen Shuriken. So I need to learn the Raise Nan first. Yes, the Raise Nan is the basics of the Rasen Shuriken. You can't use the Rasen Shuriken without mastering the Raise Nan, Shin confirmed. He had already taught Tsunade the Raise Nan, but she hadn't mastered it yet. It wasn't that difficult, though. She should be able to learn it in a few days. By the way, Tsunade, as the Senju clan princess, you shouldn't be lacking in S-rank jutsu, right? Who said I wasn't? I could get my hands on would release S-rank jutsu, but the other S-rank jutsu are sealed in the Forbidden Scroll by my grandfather. Tsunade explained. She couldn't use wood release. Besides Hashirama, no one else could. And the other S-rank jutsu developed by Tobirama, like the Flying Thunder God Jutsu and the Edo Tensei, were sealed in the Forbidden Scroll. Even if they weren't, she might not be able to learn them. The Flying Thunder God Jutsu required a talent for space-time ninjutsu, and the Edo Tensei was a complex forbidden jutsu. By the way, Shin, don't reveal this S-rank jutsu to anyone, Tsunade said seriously. S-rank jutsu were rare and coveted by even cage-level shinobi. Revealing it could be dangerous, especially with dans around. She didn't trust him not to try and steal it. Don't worry, I won't reveal it. And most people wouldn't even force me to use it. Unless something unexpected happened, Shin wouldn't be facing any truly strong opponents for now. And against ordinary genin, chunin, or even jainin, he wouldn't need the Rasen Shuriken. It was much faster to just kill them with his sword. Tsunade nodded, reassured. If only Nawake was half as strong as you, I wouldn't have to worry. I wonder how he's doing with Orochimaru. At that moment, a certain boy who was shoveling manure sneezed. Is someone thinking about me? Nawake wondered, then continued his task. As for why he was shoveling manure, Orochimaru had accepted a mission to clean up a farm, which included cleaning up the animal droppings. It was certainly an interesting mission choice. Chapter 47, 47, Nawake, are you here to disgust us after a day of training? Shin rubbed his stomach. He was hungry. Let's call it a day. I'm starving, he announced to the girls, who were sprawled on the ground, exhausted. No wonder you're so strong. You have endless stamina, Tsunade said, panting. She was exhausted. They had been training intensely for half a day, following Shin's lead, and they were worn out. Shin, however, seemed perfectly fine. Don't compare yourselves to me. I have an advantage, Shin said. The regenerative ability of his perfect sage body was incredible. Unless the training was excessively intense, he wouldn't feel tired. He was like a perpetual motion machine. As they were about to head back, they saw a figure approaching in the distance. It's Nawake. Shin's eyesight was excellent, he recognized Nawake from afar. Shin. Sis. There you are. Nawake approached with a cheerful grin, as if he had just won the lottery. Nawake, you seem happy. Did you find some money? Shin asked. No, but I earned some. And quite a bit, too. I'm treating you all to dinner today, Nawake announced excitedly. He seemed genuinely happy. But Tsunade, Kushina, and Mikoto all took a step back. Even Shin instinctively moved away. Nawake, why do you stink? Tsunade asked, wrinkling her nose. Stink do I? Nawake sniffed himself, but he couldn't smell anything. It wasn't that his sense of smell was faulty, he was simply used to it. He had been exposed to foul odors all day. Nawake, did you fall into a latrine? Kushina asked suspiciously, taking another step back. No, I was just shoveling manure all afternoon. As soon as he said that, Tsunade, Kushina, and Mikoto retreated even further. Even Shin moved away. Nawake, are you crazy? Why were you shoveling manure? Shin asked, incredulous. I didn't want to. But Orochimaru-sensei took a mission to clean up a farm, and that included shoveling manure. What could I do? Noeka said with a grimace. He didn't want to fail his first mission, so he endured the unpleasant task. And the reward was generous for a D-rank mission, comparable to a C-rank. Shin looked at Noeka with sympathy. Orochimaru had certainly chosen an interesting mission. I earned a lot, so I wanted to celebrate. Yakiniku, on me! Noeka declared grandly. Tsunade's face darkened. Noeka, couldn't you have at least taken a bath and changed clothes before coming here? You're not here to treat us, you're here to disgust us. Noeka was bewildered. He was offering to treat them to yakiniku, why were they reacting like this? But with the stench emanating from him, no one had any appetite. Even Shin, who had been hungry, felt his stomach churn. Shin, why are they looking at me like that? Noeka didn't understand the murderous glares he was receiving. Shin shook his head. Let's do this another time, Noeka. We're not up for it today. Shin rejected his offer. Noeka was both disappointed and relieved. Disappointed that they weren't accepting his offer, but relieved that he got to keep his money. Noeka left, dejected, chased away by Tsunade. Orochimaru has no shame, taking a mission like that. Only he would do such a thing, Tsunade grumbled. Are we still having dinner? I've lost my appetite, Kushina said. Of course we're eating. We'll starve if we don't. Shin wasn't going to let a little smell ruin his dinner. Food was important, especially for training. Even with his perfect sage body, he needed to eat. In the end, only Shin ate dinner that night. Kushina and the others had no appetite. Mikoto, you're living here now. Won't the Uchiha clan say anything? Shin asked. Mikoto shook her head. I'm practically invisible in the Uchiha clan. No one will say anything. Mikoto might be pretty, but in the world of shinobi, beauty wasn't everything. Her quiet personality made her blend in. Don't worry, no one will say anything about my student, Tsunade said confidently. Shin rolled his eyes. She made it sound like she was some kind of big shot. Hey, brat, are you looking down on me? Tsunade caught his expression and glared at him. Haha, you're mistaken. I was just thinking how amazing you are, Shin said, trying to appease her. Amazing? Shin is way more amazing than you, Kushina declared. Shin glared at Kushina. Was she trying to get him in trouble? Kushina, do you want to taste my fist? Tsunade threatened. What are you going to do? Kushina hid behind Shin, glaring at Tsunade. Come here, I'll punch you so hard, you'll be crying in bed, Tsunade taunted. Threatening me? You think you're so great? Give me 3 years, and I'll surpass you, Kushina retorted. Shin's lips twitched. Was Kushina challenging Tsunade to a duel in 3 years? But even in 3 years, Kushina wouldn't be a match for Tsunade. Unless she became the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki and could perfectly control its power, defeating Tsunade within 3 years was impossible. But Kushina couldn't become the Jinchuriki now. The position was already filled. And even if she did become the Jinchuriki, controlling the Nine-Tails power was no easy feat. Fine. I'll be waiting. But that doesn't mean I can't beat you up now. Tsunade hadn't given up on teaching Kushina a lesson. She approached Kushina with a mischievous grin. Shin, help. Kushina was scared of that grin. She clung to Shin. Even Shin can't help you now. I'm going to teach you some manners, little girl. Tsunade reached for Kushina. Come on, Tsunade, why are you bullying Kushina? She's still weak. There's no satisfaction in that, Shin said, stopping her. Humph, I knew you'd protect her. Tsunade let Kushina go, giving Shin face. Kushina bit Shin's arm lightly. What did he mean by she's still weak? That was insulting. Chapter 48, 48, Bonus, Copying the Kurama clan's Kekii Genkai. Tsunade, do you know of any Kekii Genkai users in Konoha? Shin asked Tsunade during breakfast the next morning. Tsunade looked at him curiously. Kekii Genkai are rare in the shinobi world. There aren't many in Konoha. There's the Uchiha clan's Sharingan, the Hyuga clan's Byakugan, the Senju clan's Sage Body, your Uzumaki clan, and the Kurama clan. Shin's eyes lit up when he heard the name Kurama clan. He had completely forgotten about them. Thanks to Tsunade's reminder, he remembered. The Kurama clan possessed a powerful Kekii Genkai, 5 senses control. A genjutsu that could control the 5 senses and even turn illusions into reality. It was the pinnacle of yin release. Yin release could create form out of nothingness, while yang release could breathe life into form. Together, they could create life. Shin didn't know if this 5 senses control was comparable to Aizensuke's Kaika Suijutsu from Bleach, but it was undoubtedly powerful. It probably wasn't as potent as Kaika Suijutsu, though. Otherwise, the Kurama clan wouldn't be such a small clan. If they could truly control all 5 senses, dominating the shinobi world wouldn't be impossible. Tsunade, are there any Kurama clan members who have awakened their Kekii Genkai? Shin asked. He wanted to copy this Kekii Genkai. The Kurama clan might have a powerful ability, but their weak constitutions might prevent them from utilizing it fully. The Kurama clan was known for their frail bodies. They tired easily and probably didn't have large chakra reserves. Chakra was extracted from cells. A weak body meant limited chakra. There used to be quite a few Kurama with Kekii Genkai. They were once as prominent as the Senju and Uchiha clans. But now they've declined. I think there's only one with an awakened Kekii Genkai. Tsunade answered, curious about his interest in the Kurama clan. That's good. I was afraid there might be none. Shin was relieved. If there were no Kekii Genkai users in the Kurama clan, he'd have to wait for Yakumo Kurama to be born. But that was over a decade away. He didn't have time to wait. And by then, he might not even need the Kurama clan's Kekii Genkai. Shin, why are you asking about this? Kushina asked curiously. Mikoto and Tsunade were also curious. It's a secret. Shin shook his head. Some secrets were better left unsaid. Tsunade, do you know where this Kurama clan member is? He's in the Konoha torture and interrogation force. With his powerful genjutsu, he's the head of the department. The Konoha torture and interrogation force. It was a position well suited for the Uchiha clan, but Hiruzen wouldn't allow it. I want to meet him. Can you take me? Shin asked Tsunade. He couldn't meet the head of the torture and interrogation force on his own. It was an Anbu department. Tsunade looked at Shin, then nodded. You agreed, aren't you going to ask why? Shin was surprised. Would you tell me if I asked? Shin chuckled awkwardly. He couldn't tell her. Let's go. Tsunade and Shin left. Kushina and Mikoto stayed behind. Even as the Sandaime Hokage's disciple, Tsunade couldn't enter the torture and interrogation force freely. But she could summon its leader, Kurama Kaze. Tsunade-sama, you summoned me. Kaze was surprised. He hadn't expected the Senju clan princess to seek him out. The Kurama clan was no longer prominent. To him, Tsunade was an important figure. Tsunade looked at Shin. It wasn't her who wanted to see Kaze, but Shin. She had no idea what he was planning. Kurama-san, I hear you're quite skilled in genjutsu. I was wondering if you could teach me. Shin said with a smile. But as he spoke, he used an advanced replication card to copy Kaze's five senses control. He felt his already powerful mental energy surge. Even his ocular power increased, causing a tingling sensation in his eyes. He blinked a few times until the tingling subsided. He could sense a change in his Manjiki Sharingan. It hadn't evolved into the eternal Manjiki Sharingan yet, but it was showing signs of it. Shin was ecstatic. This was an unexpected bonus. Kaze looked at Shin, his expression troubled. Shin wanted to learn genjutsu from him, but he wasn't keen on teaching. But if he refused, would he anger Tsunade? She was right here, after all. Tsunade glanced at Shin, puzzled. Why would he need to learn genjutsu from Kaze when he had the Manjiki Sharingan? She knew Shin must have another motive. I apologize, but I don't have the time to teach you, Kaze said apologetically. He had decided to refuse. He turned to Tsunade. As you know, Tsunade-sama, the torture and interrogation force is quite busy. I don't have the time to teach. He was afraid of angering Tsunade. The Kurama clan couldn't afford to make enemies of her. That's a shame, but I understand. Shin said. Asking for genjutsu lessons was just an excuse. Approaching Kaze without a reason would be suspicious. Shin's goal was the Kekii Genkai, he didn't care about anything else. Whether Kaze agreed or refused, it didn't matter. He actually preferred it if Kaze refused. He had no intention of taking lessons. Tsunade, let's go, Shin said. Tsunade glanced at him, still clueless about his motives. But since he was ready to leave, she followed. As they left, Kaze's eyes widened. Something felt off. Why was Tsunade acting like that kid's follower? It must be his imagination. If Tsunade knew Kaze thought of her as Shin's follower, she would probably punch him. His frail body wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow. Chapter 49, Tsunade goes on a mission. Tsunade took Uzumaki Shin to meet with Kurama Kaze. The Sandaime Hokage puffed on his pipe, his brow furrowed. Yes, Sandaime-sama. Apparently, Uzumaki Shin wanted to learn genjutsu from Kurama Kaze, but he was refused. An Anbu agent reported. Tsunade and Shin's meeting with Kaze hadn't escaped the Anbu's notice. And if the Anbu knew, Hiruzen would know. I see. Hiruzen nodded, dismissing the matter. Meanwhile, Tsunade and Shin had returned to the courtyard. Shin went straight to his room and activated his Manjiki Sharingan. He could feel the increase in his ocular power. His genjutsu must be even stronger now, but he had no one to test it on. With his immense mental energy, he felt like his genjutsu could manifest into physical attacks. Copying the Kurama clan's Kekii Genkai had been the right choice. His overall strength had increased, and his genjutsu, which had been his weakest area, was now much stronger. His genjutsu hadn't been weak before, thanks to his Manjiki Sharingan, but it had paled in comparison to his taijutsu and ninjutsu. He examined the changes in his Manjiki Sharingan. His ocular power was immense, but he still wasn't sure when it would evolve into the eternal Manjiki Sharingan. Shin, come out here. Shin heard Tsunade's call and exited his room. Orochimaru and Jiraiya were there, along with their respective genin teams. Shin-kun, long time no see. Orochimaru greeted Shin with a smile, surprising him. Not just Shin, but Tsunade and Jiraiya were also surprised. Orochimaru wasn't the type to initiate conversations. Actually, I wanted to be Shinkun's Jainin-sensei, Orochimaru declared. Wow, even you have your eyes on this kid, Orochimaru, but his performance at the academy wasn't that impressive, Jiraiya said, looking at Shin with curiosity. If you want to switch sensei, Shin, you can come to me. Orochimaru ignored Jiraiya and continued talking to Shin. Orochimaru, are you trying to steal my student? Tsunade glared at him, her chakra flaring. This snake was trying to poach her student. Did he think she was easy to bully? Such powerful chakra. Orochimaru glanced at Tsunade, a hint of envy in his eyes. Her chakra reserves dwarfed his. But he wasn't afraid of her. Chakra wasn't the sole determinant of strength. Shin-kun, what's your choice? Orochimaru looked at Shin, his eyes filled with interest. Shin shuddered. I'm happy with Tsunade-sensei. I haven't considered switching. Tsunade sighed in relief. She had been worried Shin might actually go with Orochimaru. But she had worried for nothing, Shin wouldn't follow that creep. Orochimaru might be a genius in research, but he was also undeniably creepy. That's a shame. Orochimaru shook his head in disappointment. What are you all doing here? Shin asked Orochimaru and Jiraiya. They wouldn't be here without a reason. We have a mission that requires the three of us, so, you nine will be working together for now. The Sandome will assign a Jainin to lead all three teams, Jiraiya explained. I see. Shin nodded, then looked at Tsunade. Tsunade, if you encounter any danger on this mission, run. Ah, Shin, are you worried about me? Tsunade teased. Yeah, it would be a pain if you died out there, Shin said, scratching his head. Tsunade scowled and lightly punched his arm. Can't you say something nice? The mission is urgent. I have to go. Head to Training Ground 24 and wait for your new Jainin-sensei. Tsunade, Orochimaru, and Jiraiya left. A mission that required the three of them must be dangerous. But they were all strong, they should be able to handle it. Shin, we're going on a mission together. Nawaka said excitedly. I'd rather not join you in shoveling manure. Shin's words made Hayashi and Kai, Nawaka's teammates, scowl. Nawaka had blabbed about their manure shoveling mission. Let's go to Training Ground 24. Shin led the way, followed by Mikoto and Kushina. Nawaka, Minato, and the others followed. At Training Ground 24, their new Jainin-sensei hadn't arrived yet. Shin sat down, waiting. Hey, Shin, have you been on any missions? Nawaka asked. Yeah, just a C-rank mission, Shin replied with a smile. Nawaka jumped up. What a C-rank mission? That's not fair. Why do we only get D-rank missions? He yelled, attracting the attention of the others. Kushina, you really went on a C-rank mission? Akiko asked. Kushina nodded proudly. There was no need to hide it. Humph, who knows if that's true, Kai scoffed. He seemed out of place, even his teammates, Nawaka and Hayashi, ignored him. Nawaka had initially tried to befriend Kai, but he had given up. Kai, are you looking for a beating? Kushina stood up, glaring at him. You think I'm scared of you? Kai sneered. Don't waste your breath on him. Just hit him, Shin said to Kushina. Trash talk was pointless. Actions spoke louder than words. Kushina nodded and used the adamantine sealing chains, binding Kai instantly. Akiko's eyes widened. Kushina was using the adamantine sealing chains so skillfully. Even she couldn't do that. Akiko, as a Jinkriki candidate, had received special training from Mito. But even so, she could barely use the adamantine sealing chains. She was nowhere near as proficient as Kushina. Kai struggled, humiliated and enraged, but Kushina just looked at him with disdain. Chapter 50, I was always strong. Staring at the immobilized Kai, Nawake whispered to Shin, "What jutsu was that? I don't remember sis knowing that." He assumed Tsunade had taught Kushina the adamantine sealing chains. "It's the adamantine sealing chains, an Uzumaki clan jutsu," Shin explained. "Oh, so Kai should know it too, right?" Nawake glanced at Kai. Shin scoffed. "That guy's too talentless. He probably hasn't learned it yet." Shin didn't lower his voice. Kai heard him clearly and almost choked on his own rage. Shin was practically calling him weak to his face. Kushina used the chakra chains to fling Kai away. He crashed into a tree with a groan, almost passing out. "That's a small lesson for you. Kushina-san is that strong?" Minato exclaimed in surprise. Kai had been bothering him lately, so he knew how strong Kai was. Minato could defeat Kai, but it wouldn't be easy. Kai was talented, more so than Akiko. After that little lesson, Kai didn't try to pick a fight. He had learned his place. An hour passed, but their temporary Jainin sensei still hadn't arrived. "What's taking so long?" Some grumbled impatiently. Finally, after another half hour, their sensei appeared. Shin didn't recognize him. "Hello, I'm Asakawa Ki. You can call me Asakawa sensei. I'll be your Jainin sensei for a while." He introduced himself. He seemed like a decent guy. "Asakawa sensei, can we go on a mission?" Nawake asked eagerly. "A mission? Sure, I was planning on taking you on one anyway," Asakawa sensei agreed. "Not a D-rank mission, sensei. A higher level one." After learning that Shin and his team had completed a C-rank mission, Nawake wanted to do the same. Asakawa sensei frowned and shook his head. It was too soon for them to take on higher level missions. If something happened, he would be held responsible. And these were the students of the Hokage's 3 disciples. He couldn't afford any mishaps. No matter how much Nawake pleaded, Asakawa sensei refused. Nawake could only sulk. Asakawa sensei ended up taking them on a weeding mission. The great Uzumaki Shin, reduced to pulling weeds. Shin stared at the field and sighed dramatically. Mikoto giggled. It was rather amusing. A few days ago, he was slaughtering elite Jainin, and now he was weeding a field. What a difference! "What's so funny?" Mikoto Shin asked. "Guess," Mikoto winked playfully. It was the first time Shin had seen her act so mischievously. Kushina, however, saw it as Shin being captivated by Mikoto. Jealousy flared within her. "What are you two doing? Stop flirting and start weeding," she huffed. "Kushina, your puffed up cheeks are so cute." Shin couldn't resist teasing her, pinching her cheeks gently. "I'm not cute." Kushina glared at him. She'd rather be called beautiful. Calling her cute made her feel like a child. "Mikoto, come weed over here with me." "Stay away from him, he's a bad influence." Kushina dragged Mikoto away, leaving Shin feeling a bit hurt. Ninja art, multi-shadow clone jutsu. Dozens of Shin clones appeared beside him. He could have created thousands, but he restrained himself. "Get to work." He ordered his clones to start weeding. Nawake and the others stared in awe at the army of Shin clones. Even Asakawa sensei was surprised. He couldn't create that many clones. Actually, he didn't even know the multi-shadow clone jutsu. Why didn't I think of that? Kushina smacked her forehead. She was so dumb. Why weed herself when she could use shadow clones? She used the multi-shadow clone jutsu, creating over a dozen clones. Having large chakra reserves was a blessing. Why do you all know jutsu? Noeki asked enviously. Noeki, don't tell me you don't know any jutsu. I might have to make fun of you, Shin teased. I know jutsu, but not the shadow clone jutsu, Noeki grumbled. He knew a few C-rank jutsu, but he hadn't learned the shadow clone jutsu yet. Don't worry, Noeki. You're only a little behind me. Keep working hard, and you'll catch up. Shin patted his shoulder encouragingly. A little, you're exaggerating. Noeki protested, looking at the vast difference in their clone count. Don't mind the details. Just keep chasing my shadow. Even though you can't even see it, you have to have dreams. What if they come true? I really want to punch you right now. Noeki clenched his fists. Shin was getting more and more annoying. Go ahead, try it. You can't beat me anyway, Shin said with a grin. I don't believe you. Noeki launched a surprise attack, aiming a punch at Shin. He couldn't take it anymore. Shin effortlessly sent Noeki flying. He landed headfirst in the dirt, his limbs flailing. Shin pulled him out like a radish. Believe me now? He asked, looking at Noeki's mud-covered face. Shin, why are you so strong after graduation? What's your secret? Noeki asked, defeated. I was always strong. You just didn't notice. Thanks for watching.